we've worked on a range of projects committed to the idea that using history, particularly recent history, contemporary history, alongside social science research is the best way to get a good handle on what's happening, rather than simply taking a snapshot of the present and hoping to work out from that what's going on. We're involved in writing the centenary history of FIFA, co-writing that. And I've worked, my own academic career has been, first of all, in French history, writing a history of French sport and then British sport. And most recently with Cambridge University, attempting a project on how we can write a history of sport in Europe. It is amazing, before I just mention these specific projects, that we at present have no history of sport in Europe as a Europe-wide phenomenon. We have histories of European economics, of European politics, military histories and so forth, but no general European history of sport. So that would be a personal objective of mine in the future. But today I want to talk about specific research projects that we've been involved in, which I'm delighted to see attending the Sport Forum yesterday and looking at the presentations. Almost serendipitously, I suppose, come in very much into the framework of thinking in Europe, and the European Commission's recent paper, which I read with great interest. We have been interested in working on areas of social inclusion in sport and trying to generate projects which both look at the history of social inclusion and the current reality. And it's based on a simple idea that you need to have proper and serious research if you're to understand these phenomena. I was delighted yesterday with so many discussion, so many mentions of how good it is to have social inclusion, how positive sport is for marginalized groups, how we want to get the widest sports participation possible. But it's one thing to say these things, it's another thing to actually look at the realities of what happens when you try to do it. So that was the purpose of the two projects I want to talk about today. One relates to sport and learning disability, and I was in Britain, and I was delighted to see that there is a project going forth in Europe at the moment on sport and learning disability in Europe. The second project is, and that is a research project which I co-directed. The second project is one of my PhD students who is looking at sport and ethnicity, particularly the history of a black football club in Leicester over a 40-year period. On the Special Olympics, this, as you will know, is a movement for people with learning disabilities, intellectual disabilities, the terms vary, but not physical disabilities. It is very clearly separated from the Paralympic movement, which is based on the principle of sporting excellence. The Special Olympics is based on the principle of sports participation, so that all of those who join are able to participate in a range of events, including a 4-yearly national Olympic event in which the symbols of the Olympics and the medals and so forth are replicated for those with learning disabilities. In Leicester, where I live and work, in 2009 hosted one of these 4-yearly events. And it was the largest one which has ever been mounted, and which we saw as an opportunity to do some really extensive primary research, which was funded by the City of Leicester itself, by my partner university in Switzerland, and to some extent by Special Olympics. It's a very large event, as you'll see from this. Don't want to batter you with statistics. 10,000 athletes, carers, coaches all together. 2,500 athletes, then carers and coaches making up this larger number. Significant media coverage, significant economic income to the city in terms of occupation of hotels, rooms, and so forth. Although, as I will mention, it has major economic problems associated with it. A key issue is volunteers. To make this work, we recruited 1,500. The Special Olympics and Leicester City Council recruited 1,500 volunteers, many of which came from black and minority ethnic backgrounds. So there was a strong emphasis on social inclusion. Within the city of Leicester, which I will point out, as I will point out later, now has a 40% black and ethnic minority population, and looks as if it will be the first city in Britain with a black and minority ethnic majority. So, what did we do? Excuse me. We, thank you. Okay, thank you. What did we do? We interviewed a wide range of the athletes themselves. We interviewed those that coached them. We interviewed their families. We also worked with the officials in the city who had to mount this very large event on very, very small resources. We also asked the public whether or not hosting an event of this kind would change their attitudes. So 6 months before the event, we surveyed them on what they knew about learning disability and sport. We surveyed them during the event itself, and we surveyed them 6 months afterwards. This is the first, as far as I know, this is the first time that there's ever been a serious attempt to actually capture public opinion on this issue. So what did we find out? We did find that the positive messages which we heard yesterday about sport and social inclusion really do apply when you go and talk to people and interview them widely. It is a meaningful event. It does work very successfully in terms of improving health. We did health checks on all the athletes that were included in the games. That was part of the event. We also looked at the questions of raising confidence. We looked at attitudes from carers and families, both in terms of feeling the recognition of their issues around learning disability and what they wanted in the future. We looked at the way that this also contributes to building up skills within a medium-sized city on hosting major events. And we looked at positive forms of public response, as I said. We also looked at how the media covered this event, which was a particularly difficult one in some ways for journalists. Was it a story about people with disabilities, or was it a story about sport and sporting achievement? And we analysed that in some detail. You can see from the simple amount of time that was accorded to it, it got significant national media attention on television. Finally, what were the lessons that we got out of this? The first thing was, it's all very well to want this. It's a completely different thing to make it happen. There was a crisis of funding. There was no private sponsorship for this event. The attempt to raise private sponsorship failed, partly because the event happened at precisely the moment of the world financial crisis. But it also, I think, failed because there was simply not enough commitment from the organisations that were approached, and particularly there was a problem from the LOCOG, the organisers of London 2012, who are not willing to allow this event to be linked to them, although the IOC has allowed the use of the word Olympic. And those of you here will know how difficult it is to use the word Olympic in an event. They have allowed the Special Olympics the use of the word Olympic. There's no connection between the Special Olympics and London 2012, and that proved to be a critical issue. So what happened? The city of Leicester, in the end, had to pay £1 million in the debts that ran up from hosting this event. The choice was either not to hold the event or for the city to pay for it. And that's what happened. Now, clearly, in future, particularly the current situation in British government finances with the massive reductions to local authorities, this is not going to happen again. So it will be very interesting to see whether an event of this type could happen again unless there is major new sources of funding. Right. The other issues we found was it was monocultural. Special Olympics still hasn't really fully itself got a social inclusive agenda. We found that there was a very patchy coverage over the whole of Britain, so that London had 50 Special Olympics athletes and Scotland had 700. It was very inconsistent the way the whole recruitment to the movement was based. But for the first time, we felt we got some really serious data on this phenomenon and how we can go forward with it in future. So we hope that will inform their decisions. And this will be launched in the House of Commons we hope in May, the report that we wrote. There's a 90,000 word report and a 10-page executive summary, which will be launched then.